everyone. Welcome to the Quantum Bridge again with myself, Gary, and my co-host, Casper. We have another new guest with us today that I'll pass over to Casper because he's familiar with John already and he will introduce him a bit more for us.
Thank you, Gary. Hello, everybody. Welcome, John.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
He's in. He's used to being the other side of this. So just to say that John is somebody who's got his own podcast now. And obviously, I'm sure he'll come on to, we'll touch on that a bit more. But just to say, yeah, John is somebody that I've known for, I think we've known each other since the late 1980s, actually, mate.
Probably, yeah, 90, 89, 90, I'd say, yeah.
Yeah, around that sort of time. Because I think I was, I don't think I was even 20 then. So that probably means you weren't either.
No, I was like 17 maybe, yeah.
Yeah, I think when we
17 or 18.
You were 17, 18, yeah. So that goes back to Southeast London days. But anyway, before we get into that, so I have asked John to join us today because as with many of our guests, and it's great that we have got so many now, we are very much about giving people a platform that might be slightly out of their normal context. And again, we can come on to the reasons why this is slightly different to what John's normally involved in. But people that Gary and I feel their voices should be heard, they've got interesting things to say, and that their lives have been lived probably quite a long way outside of the normal standard paradigm. So before I gibber on too much about all of this, John, I've never really, although I know you have, we've never really talked about your early life and stuff. Can you give Gary and I and the audience an idea of sort of your formative years? So maybe up to around 5, 10, that sort of context for us.
Yeah. So I was born in Bethnal Green in East London, and we lived there in a council flat till I was about 4 or 5. I can't remember exactly how long I was a kid. I can't remember it much. Yeah. And then I've got an older brother and older sister. I just remember this kind of the griminess of the area, and there was like fires in the bins all the time, and just like old stuff, you know, from back in the day.
Well, this is the 70s, wasn't it? So
yeah, fire engines non-stop, like bad, bad, bad. And then we moved to Waltham Abbey in Essex, and that is kind of where I grew up, unfortunately, because at that point in time, that was not a place I wanted to be whatsoever. So yeah, I went to school there, and yeah, that's where I discovered like the stuff that I like, that I continue to like throughout my life until this point. So I basically discovered a load of stuff that was not accepted by any people out in the suburbs at that point in time, which was like BMX riding and punk music, metal music. So that's kind of
John,
like
just to say, before we jump too far forward, because I like that bit about the sort of 4 or 5 years old, and then that bit before. I'm thinking that the other stuff you're now touching on might come sort of after you 8, 9, 10.
Okay.
Going into secondary.
Oh yeah. So you want me to go from like infant school, and
no, I don't really want you. You don't need to do it like that. But I just, in terms of a timeline here, because, and the main reason I'm saying this is, as long as I've known you, you're somebody who's absolutely stayed true to living your truth and living by your rules. And that's a hard thing to do in this world, as you're even touching on now. I'm keen to understand what the genesis was for that. Did that come even at the age of 5 or 6? Did you start to be outside of the norm? Or were your family slightly outside of the box? Or were you rebelling? So when was that happening? When was the real John that I've always known? Where did he begin, do you think?
All right, cool. So we're not skipping to like teenage years. We're getting to how we got there, yeah?
That's right.
So I don't really know. On reflection, no, my family was fairly basic, normal family. You know, I was definitely, I'm definitely the odd one out, so to speak. But I don't really, since I was very young, like probably 7 or 8, there's always been something that's like, that doesn't seem correct about this world that we live in. Yeah, this is from a very, very early age. Like,
that's why I wanted to get to that. Yeah, I'm loving it. Yeah.
So I've always been like, why is it like that? Why, like, but this is from when I was a child, you know. Like, I'd ask my mum or my dad, like, what, how comes it's like that? Like, so I always had a question, you know. And then as you do, you get an answer and you don't think too much about it, and then something else will come up 6 months later or a year later or whatever, and you'll be, why is this like this? What, like, why is this war happening, for instance? Yeah. Why do people not like people who have red hair, as they did back then? That, like, it was a big statement, you know.
Yeah.
Why are these people bad and these people good? And, you know, and it just kind of, I don't know where it all came from. It must have been coming from all different directions. And then it was just like, so then you kind of get indoctrinated into this way of thought, because you're in the suburbs or wherever you may be. It can happen anywhere. And your road is set pretty much, and you've got to do this, and you've got to go to school, and you've got to wear your uniform, and you've got to be into the stuff that the other kids at school are into, or you stick out and you take abuse for it.
So could I just ask quickly, was that bit of noticing that things weren't, it just didn't resonate with you? Not, and the answers you were getting, probably, you can tell me, but probably weren't really fulfilling. When you got them, the question had still remained, basically.
Yeah, the question wasn't answered. It was an answer, but it wasn't answered. It was answered in a degree of like what your parents or whoever answered the question knew, and they thought that was the answer that they had, but it wasn't the answer that I wanted, or it wasn't the answer to the question I was asking. Do you know what I mean? Like,
it wasn't fulfilling on some level.
Yeah, it was an answer that had been given to them previously by someone else.
Yeah. And to them previously by someone else, and then
exactly, yeah. So then that's kind of how this whole structure, this world has been built.
Of course.
But I didn't really have a strong resistance to it until I got into riding bikes.
Right.
And that was like,
when did that actually happen? What was the, because that seems to me such a, you know, people won't understand necessarily, other than if they're already in the BMX world and they're familiar that that's an area that you inhabit and that's something that's become a very intrinsic part of you. That aspect of sort of BMX and the rebellious side of that and not fitting in, did it just click with you at some point when you're 7, 8, whenever it was, mate? When was that suddenly you found there was something that in some way was answering those questions for you, or was giving you some hope, or whatever it did for you?
Well, it wasn't until I was in my teens that became an issue, because we had the boom of everyone had a BMX for 2 years or a year or whatever it was, and it was like the most exciting thing that happened since the skateboard craze. Anyway, so everyone was buzzing on this new like activity and this exciting thing from the US, and it was like people were all over it, you know, like it was the best thing.
And would that have been when you were about, what, 9 or 10? Is that the sort of time? Yeah, okay.
Yeah, like 9 or 10, exactly. So then all of your mates had these bikes, and you was all going out and you was all riding these bikes, and you was all just playing around, basically. And we all obviously had goals of like, we want to go and ride here, we want to go and ride there. It was all fresh and new, and everyone was super excited. And then it slowly started to like fall away, and then over about 2 years it was done. Like, and it was just ridiculed, you know. It was just ridiculous, this like childish playing around on a bike when you had to be a grown-up, even though you was 13 or 14. You had to, it was like, grow up, why are you still riding that thing, you know? And it was like, well, I still like riding this. This is the best thing that I found. Like, what's the problem here? Like,
and was everything in you saying, I've found something I like. We were all having a good time. Why would you just drop it for the sake of, again, it comes back to that whole thing of for the sake of fitting back in? Because I don't believe that probably a lot of those people you rode with did really start to hate it if they'd liked it 6 months before,
No.
right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So people were just being passed on this sort of information that was no longer cool. And I think a lot of people, it was like a boom. And then, as all booms, it blows up and then it blows back down. And it only ever leaves a few people. But those people that stay with it are usually like quite interesting people at the end of it, I think, anyway. The same with punk. Like, that blew up and then it blew down, didn't it? And everyone kind of hated that, even though I was too young to have seen that. But yeah, so then it was like, okay, it was the 80s. It was like BMX sucked in the 80s. It looked really bad, but it was still like some cool stuff that got done. But it didn't suck as much as the rest of the stuff that people were doing. Like, that was really bad, you know? So it's like, well, this may be crap, but from that perspective, it was still better than all of you other guys' stuff. Like, what are you doing? At best, playing football.
Yeah.
Ah, man. That's not it. Yeah. So that kind of was the first spark of like, well, no, well, fuck you. I kind of still like doing this.
John, the other thing that strikes me about the bike thing is that, you know, the blowing up and blow down, I understand all of that. But actually, I think that you and many others found the fact that there was self-expression through that, and also it wasn't a team-based self-expression. I know you're with friends and you're having fun, but it's an ability to show yourself and mark yourself out as different. I don't really mean from an ego point of view. I just mean whatever you put in, you get out. Whereas if you're in a team game and everybody else plays badly, you lost anyway, and it was a crap day and a crap game and all those things. But with BMX, there's something different about, even with skateboarding, to be fair, as well. So does that sort of resonate at that time, that you found something you could be creative on?
Yeah, I guess to an extent. I never really looked at it back then that way, but as time went on, it became more of like a thing that was a mental challenge to like how far can you push, to how much like inside you have you got to keep falling off and keep trying. How much do you want to do this? You know, that's the thing that I think a lot of people stay with it for. It's obviously the fun of it, but like, it's such an internal challenge to fall off. You might not even hurt yourself, but then you fall off again, you might not hurt yourself. You fall off a third time, and then you got like, you're a bit tender, you know. And then you might pull the fifth try, and then you fall off the sixth, and you're like, you don't want to do it anymore. It's like, but do you want to do it, or do you just want to go, fuck it, I'm not going to do it anymore? So when you're like late teens, early 20s, going into the 30s, that was the big challenge for me, like the mental side of things. You saw this one move that you wanted to do, and was your desire strong enough to push out your fear, you know? And that's
and going alongside that, I'm guessing that all the thing of the derision and everybody saying that's no longer cool, and you having to live a slightly outlier type existence by continuing to do this, that's making you even a stronger relationship with the bike thing, and overcoming these obstacles. You've overcome the fact that you've been pushed to one side or marginalized a bit, which I find odd for you because you get on with everybody so well, mate. But obviously you sort of you took that path because society had got involved at that point. So did that give you some extra motivation, or was it always just this thing of there's an internal journey here? And I want to
no. So if I go back further, like I've jumped 15 years ahead. Yeah. If I go back further, it was like, so there's no one in your town that rides anymore. So you have to, I was kind of dwindling from riding because there was just no one to ride with. Yeah. So we was on a bus and we was going swimming to this place in Chingford, this open air swimming pool.
Is it just with some mates of yours, is it?
Yeah, just some guys that used to ride as well, which still used to hang out. And they was kind of playing around with skating a little bit, because skating and BMX is virtually the same thing. So, but this skate boom was coming in. It was like the later part of the mid 80s, like 86. So we're going to an outdoor swimming pool, just like chav shit, you know, like We're just gonna fucking do the same as what everyone else is doing. So we get on the bus, and the bus goes past Chinkford Halfpipe, which is now like one of the legendary spots of the 80s. So we get on the bus, it's two dudes with skateboards, and we're like, well, we just start talking to them. Oh, where are you guys going? You know, they're a bit older than us. And they're like, oh, we're just going to the Chinkford Halfpipe, which is down there. And they point down this road, and there's like, we're getting off here. So we knew where to get off. They got off. We went to we was like, oh, we'll stop by on the way back. So then we went where we was going. We went back there. Obviously, we didn't have like bikes or skateboards or anything. We went back there just to check it out. And there was like a whole scene. There was a half pipe, which I'd never seen before, really, to that degree. It was like a big, huge public half pipe in a park. There was a load of people skating there. There was a big BMX. Well, I say big. There was 10 people on BMXs. There was probably 10 or 15 people skateboarding. And it was like a whole new world, you know? It was like,
was that big wooden half pipe that was next to the smaller
next to the pool? Yeah,
pool,
that's it. Yeah, but it was a different version of that.
Right.
So it was like an earlier version.
Yeah.
But it was that place. So I discovered a whole new world, really, and that brought me completely back into it. Even though, like, when I say I was out of it, I wasn't really out of it. I just wasn't.
So what was it, just to give an idea of when that was? That like 13, 14? How old were you then?
I was 14.
Right.
I think I was 14, around that age. Yeah.
Yeah. And you still had a bike, did you? You'd managed to sort of bring on. Right. Yeah. Yeah.
I rode a contest the year before that, so I say I wasn't riding that much. Probably I didn't ride as much as I used to, but I still rode. But that completely immersed me back into it. And there was kids my age, they was more into it than I was, because they'd never stopped, like even had 2 months off or whatever. I can't even remember at that point in time, but it was definitely like a time where there wasn't much riding going on. So once I found that place, that was it. Like, I was like, this is my scene.
And what about those other kids that were with you? Did they
other kids that were with me? No, they came a couple of times after that, but then they were soon gone. You know, it was, and as expected, really, looking back at it, it was hard to stay within that activity at that point in time, because it was just a lot of mental pressure for a young, you know, not grown up, but a young boys and fucking kids, you know.
Yeah. Can I ask about, without jumping forward too much, I'm just wondering what the BMX thing's like at the moment, because I'm thinking when we were younger, you've mentioned, I mean, I remember roller skates, skateboards, BMX. I think the thing that got me out was when the sort of hip hop came from the US, so I got into all the turntables and things. I'm just wondering what it's like now. I mean, the kids just got their faces in phones and tablets. Or are they still, you know, what's keeping the BMX going these days? Is it just guys like, you know, retro sense, or we get new people?
That's a good question. You do get new people, but it's just become a bit. It's become all broken up into tiny pieces. Whereas, like, so you've got like an Olympic style BMX team, which is like, it's sportsmanlike. It's like, so back then I'm trying to distance myself from these people that are doing these athletic sports type things, and then you look at that and it's kind of like, it's very similar. It's almost like gymnastics on a bike. It's completely different to like your average BMX guy. And then you've got like racing, which again is similar mindset to the Olympics. And then you've got like street riding, which there's so many different brackets to that. And then you've got like bowl riding and trail riding, which are two different things again. So it's just been broken up into little tiny areas, which is really difficult for an outsider to figure out like what's what. Like even inside it is quite difficult to figure out some of the street riding, because it's like, it's all street riding, but it's done so differently on such different obstacles that it's a difficult one basically. But what keeps it going? guess I don't know. I don't even. It still looks cool if it's done right. That's what I think keeps it going.
Yeah, absolutely.
And
there is the
something
element of freedom as well, John. I mean, with any bike, right, you can just pick it up and do it and do something on it, whether good or bad.
And you've got a scene to go to. All right, there might be 5 kids in your scene, but there's scenes now everywhere. So you go out, you've got your people that you can attach yourself to, that you all like bike riding. There's way more BMX riders now than there was, like, well, this is a bad patch for BMX, but like, say you went back to the 80s and 90s, there's more people riding now, definitely.
Yeah. Just jumping back again to sort of the 14, 15 area, and maybe going up to finishing school, because I'm really keen. We may not have time on this one to go into the sort of post-school bit, but basically by the time you were getting up towards that 15, 16 and riding had become part of your life again, and you got a new scene there and what that's all emerging, are you starting to again have that feeling coming up in you, or maybe it never went away, that I don't see myself going the trajectory of maybe your brother and sister, for example, or other kids at school, or what? Were you already thinking, I'm not doing any of that, I'm doing something completely different? And if so, what was, I know what you ended up doing, but I'd love to hear about where you thought you were going, if anywhere, you know.
So once I'd rediscovered that, and I was going to Chingford a lot, like every chance I could get, I would go there to meet my friends and ride bikes, or not even ride bikes a lot of the time, just hang out. And at that point in time, I wasn't that good on my bike. I could do some tricks, but I wasn't like anything to be looked at or anything. I just liked doing it. And yeah, that at that point I was like, fuck this, I do not care about school. I like went for a stage where I just did not give a shit about school, and then I didn't go back after. Like, remember we used to do like our exams in the summer, so you did your mock exams in December or November, and I didn't go back after December. I was like, that's it. I didn't go back other than to do my exams, which was also useless. I didn't need them either. And that was definitely, I'm not treading the normal path of people.
And can I just ask, John, was that the vibe that you were getting from most of the other guys that you were hanging about with anyway? So, i.e., had you found your gang, your crew, the people who resonated most with you at that point, and they were feeling the same? Because I always thought that was more like a skateboarding, BMXing scene was very much like, listen, this is where it's at. We don't need to do all that stuff. We don't want to do what our parents had done, all of that sort of thing. So had you found and felt comfortable with your crew? And if you had, when I first knew you, you were very much not going home that much, right? You used to stay with people and whatever. Yeah. Had that started to emerge even when you were like 15, 16, or was that slightly later that you became more of a nomad in that sense?
It was probably later, because I probably weren't allowed to. I hadn't developed. I wasn't allowed to probably do that, and I hadn't developed this just, I need to escape from normality kind of vibe. So that's where that came from.
Was that bubbling, Noah? About that age, 15, 16, was that already taking shape in you? Was it like, actually, maybe I don't have to do what everybody else is doing? Had that thought really struck you yet at that point?
No. I was at that stage in my life. I vividly remember thinking, I'm never going to fit into anything in this world. Like, that was a very common thought, that I like, what am I going to do? Because I'm not going to fit into anything. I don't want to do some shit job. I don't want to work for anyone. I just want to play around on a bike and hang out with my friends. And that was it. I often just was like, I've no idea what I'm going to do, but I'm not going to do any of that.
I just want to say quickly, other people won't know this yet about you, but obviously I knew this about you almost immediately, that you loved bikes, you loved things like wrestling, right? You had these real other interests, and the things that you completely pushed aside, like you were never really interested in drinking, same as myself and Gary actually on that one. So there was tons of things about you, particularly skills like art, for example. I always knew you as being a good artist, somebody that could draw, do all these sorts of things. So at that time, just to frame it for people who might be much younger than us, perhaps, there wasn't this thought that you could go off and do anything and make a living out of it. It was just, if you had all these skills, well, so what?
Yeah, yeah, they were useless.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that I ended up looking at skateboarding actually because they were a bit older than us, and more of them had that path because they were like 20 or whatever, and we were 16. But when I was 16, that was it. My old life was gone because I didn't have to go to school anymore.
Yeah.
So that was it.
And how were your parents about all of this? Because I always knew you with a sense of it wouldn't have mattered because you weren't there anyway. But was there a time of friction about the 16 years or whatever years old?
Yeah, it went on for years. Yeah, yeah, it went on for probably 10 years. Like where they were just like, "What the fuck? This child's just wasting his life." Like, yeah, because that's what it seemed like to someone
from their generation.
And to be fair, like we never saw it getting big again. We just always thought it was going to be this shitty little thing that like just so few people were sort of into, you know.
And was that made worse by the fact, was your brother doing things that they expected? Was your sister? The other thing is, what were your siblings doing? Because that can make it even more painful for them and you. Yeah.
Well, my sister was, she was kind of just doing the normal thing, you know. She just like boyfriend, got married, kid, you know. My brother is very successful. He's an art director. So yeah, I think that probably made it worse because they're thinking, well, they always used to tell me, this guy is more talented artistically than this guy, and this guy's gone all the way to like where you can go, as far as you can go almost, you know, probably not at that point in time, but in more recent years. And I guess that would, if that was me, I guess I'd be thinking that, but I don't know.
Yeah,
I would have said so. They were just mad because I did not want to do anything to participate in everyday society as it was back then.
Yeah,
and half of it was me thinking that, but because when you, with hindsight and with like an adult mind, you can see it differently. But back then you're like, no, fuck, you just dig your heels in, and you're not having none of it, you know.
Yeah.
And then I found like also through skating, through knowing older skaters, I found their music scene, and that's how I, as well as like the older BMX guys like Andy Brown and the guys that you know, they was into better music. So that's kind of like, that's it. I attached myself to all these little tiny things that I really liked.
Well, the music, the energy of it, the words in it, and everything fed back exactly into that counterculture thing that was going. I.e., it was something where you were getting answers of a sort, right? The answers that never came from society or school or your mum and dad or your grandparent, none of that. They can't give you that, right? But this scene and these lyrics and that energy and the BMX thing suddenly could give you a level of fulfillment and give you a quote unquote home. And
yeah, that's exactly what it was. Yeah, so exactly the same. Like, so we've got this BMX thing going, which is a dedicated small group of people, and then you could go to an event and there'd be other people from small groups from the country, and you'd meet up and there'd be 100 people, you know. And then you go to a gig in central London to see whatever band it'd be, and there'd be, you know, sometimes not even 100 people there. I've been to things where there's 30 people, you know.
Yeah,
like you say, exactly the same thing. Like the dedicated, that's their love, and that's what they're going to go and do. So
they're hardcore. Yeah,
I fit in. I thought that was this is me, you know. This
and the great thing about that is from what I know of you as well, you have created, and I'd like to leave the latter part of your life, actually the 20s onwards, for another chat if you're happy to come back sometime, because from what I know of you, sort of 17, 18 onwards, everybody who knew you and in that thing, there was a real affection for you. There's always been a lot of love and affection for you in that. So it wasn't just that it was something that you would like to be in or were in a bit. Suddenly you had found this sort of this extended family, right?
And then like, so as you moved up the ladder, say from Chingford, because a lot of those guys end up getting into skating or just moving away for schooling, or that they kind of dwindled the bike stuff. So there was only a couple. There was a couple of people from sort of the suburbs that used to come into London that we used to ride with, and then obviously as that dwindles, you find other people. Like we started going to South London, and we you know, and it was shrinking and shrinking and shrinking, you know. So we had to travel further to find these people that we had to hang out with. But yeah, that's kind of how it rolled, and you found them people, and then when that kind of dwindled down, you went further and you had to find other, you know, but you just kept going.
But the great thing about that, John, is those relationships that you've made from that sort of time, from what I see with the union tapes and the podcast work that you do now and whatever, and just the shop, which all of those things we can come on to another time. Those are some really strong bonds that go back now for years with just a really decent bunch of people, you know.
Yeah. I mean, some of those people that I've interviewed, I didn't know before. Before the interviews, but yet you've all gone along the same line.
Yeah, I was just going to say, you may not have known them on that one-to-one level even, right? Or you may have seen them or whatever, but you've got such a commonality in terms of your history and where you've come from that it seems, I mean, when you talk to people on your podcast, it seems like you could have known them for 20, 30 years, you know?
That's it, That's what a few other people have said as well. But I've known of them, obviously, because they were well-known people. But the timelines are very similar. They're just slight variants in what's going on. Like that there.
And have you found generally, I mean, this is probably, we're coming to a final question really at the moment, but have you found generally that those people who have done a similar journey are generally as well sort of not outcasts necessarily, but they're on the outline, they're on the fringes a bit more than probably the more mainstream, or are some of those guys, they just happen to ride, but actually their world is still a fairly mainstream one? I'd guess it's normally quite fringe, really.
100%. They're all people that persevered and pushed, but they had to get through that misfit phase as well. So they're people that, if you think about, I'm just trying to think of like the people that I've interviewed so far, and I would say they're all like that. They're not mainstream people whatsoever.
Yeah.
I don't think anyway. And I think that's where it came from. They've all got that same sort of mentality of like, I'm doing this and this is what I'm doing.
Yeah. And the great thing that it seems riding gave a lot of you guys was that ability that you touched on before to chase something down, have tunnel vision, and not to care what it took to get there. You're going to get there, right? Or you're going to die trying, basically.
Or you many times you didn't get there and you're depressed about yourself, you know. But that also builds a good person.
Yeah.
Like if ever you're trying to achieve something and you can't achieve it, sometimes that's good for you. Often that's good for you.
Yeah, there's a lot of life lessons, I think, that you've taken from it. And again, that we can maybe talk about in the future and how you've applied that to being, now you've been in business, you've done the other stuff that you do, you've done your artwork and your tattoos, all those other areas I'd like to touch on. But all of them still will pay some homage to the fact that you had to go through all that thing of falling off and getting knocked down and getting back up again.
Or sometimes not even falling off, but being too afraid to try it, which is even worse.
Yeah,
that's the worst one, where you're like, you can't even bring yourself to try this because you're scared you're going to hurt yourself. That's worse. If you try it and fall off, you go, well, at least I tried that, you know. Yeah. So you was always one up the ladder if you fell over. So, I mean, and obviously there's people that did it a million times better than me and my friends, but you still have to go up the rungs to get there.
Yeah, I don't think that's the point anyway. I think the point is the facing your fear. And, you know, we've had a lot of that in the past few years as well. And again, that's something that I hope we can come on to talk about, because, you know, facing your fears comes in a lot of guises. But if you've had to do that for the whole of your life, and if you're used to being on the fringes and a bit of an outsider anyway, it's actually been a lot easier in the last few years to deal with that, I think, when you were already marginalised when you were plumbing 12 or 13 years old. You know?
Yeah, doing it as an adult is way more comfortable than doing it as as a child who never knew or never thought he was going to have anything in life whatsoever, you know.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's pretty simple. Way easier.
All right, mate. On that note, it's a nice note to end with. I'm sorry these are very short at the moment, but if you're willing to think about coming back and talking about your 20s and beyond, we'd love to have you back sometime, mate.
Yeah, no worries. Anytime. Like we can definitely touch on a few things that might be of interest.
Yeah.
Fantastic.
Yeah. Let's go into some deep water. All right, mate.
All right.
Lovely to see you.
Nice one, Cass. Thanks a lot. Thank
Take
you,
care.
Gary. Cheers.
See you, mate.